The following Thursday there was the most dramatic incident at the Pentagon since Hunter's predecessor had accidentally ordered the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile against North Korea. No one knew how the fire started, but inquiry the following week ruled out arson. James Hunter thought it strange that it should have broken out in the very warehouse in which the laminator had been stored. South clearly also had his suspicions, but fortunately by this time the blueprint for the machine had long been transferred to floppy disk and uploaded to a dozen military and other computers in the special presidential code. As soon as news of the fire had been made public, Rockman himself had been on the phone to the White House, a note of anxiety in his voice. Strangely, this anxiety had turned not to joy but to disappointment when Hunter had given him the news. At least that was what it had sounded like to the President, but he dismissed the idea as soon as it entered his head. It was clearly absurd even to suspect the banker. After all, he was going to make billions of dollars out of the laminator. All the same, he confided with South that in future only the two of them were to be privy to confidential information about the device. South agreed. The following week the two men met with Rockman to discuss the marketing of the laminator in greater detail. As soon as he realised that although the machine had been destroyed, the blueprint was safe, Rockman had put together a team of experts and thrown himself into the production and marketing strategy with great enthusiasm. The meeting at the banker's penthouse flat consisted of the President, South, the banker himself, two scientists, a PR man and an economist. The strategy was as follows. The Research and Development Department of the Pentagon would manufacture 100 of the terrestrial prototypes which would be exhibited around the United States, two in each state. A new company would be formed, Ramu, which would issue shares in the new stock. Initial capitalisation was to be $10 billion. A special and totally independent fund would be set up by Rock Bank in order to advance loans to companies and individuals who wanted to take advantage of the new issue but did not have sufficient liquid assets. This plan of campaign was followed to the letter, and in due course it was announced to the American public that a new source of renewable and virtually free energy had been developed by the US government. James Hunter was a little disappointed in not being possible to credit the alien with bringing the gift of eternal energy to the planet Earth. They had considered informing the public of the truth, but this would have created so many problems that the decision was taken by the President and his inner sanctum to consign the secret of Ramu's visit to a special security file that would remain closed for 100 years. Besides, it soon became clear to all concerned that there were far more pressing terrestrial problems caused by the advent of the laminator than that of crediting their mysterious benefactor. The share issue went ahead with much fanfare and the unanimous approval of economists of all political persuasions, Republican, Democratic and Radical. The only person who seemed to have any reservations at all was Colonel South. South, it seemed, had been talking to a young major in his old regiment, Clifford Douglas, who had some rather peculiar ideas about both banking and the stock market. He had been reading some old books by obscure English authors, Arthur Kitson, an inventor and industrialist, two noblemen, an Earl of Tankerville and a Duke of Bedford, and a 19th century American populist, Mrs. Sarah Emery. Douglas had been convinced somehow that rather than the Rock Bank issuing loans in order to advance the purchases of shares in Ramu, the shares should be issued free. South admitted this idea bore a great deal of sense, and indeed wondered why no one had ever thought of it before. Douglas said that people had thought of this before. Then he went on to tell South about a centuries-old conspiracy between a secret cabal of bankers and Freemasons to control all the world's gold. At this point, South began to suspect that Douglas was 3 sandwiches short of a picnic, a suspicion that was confirmed when the Major was shortly admitted to Bethesda Military Hospital suffering from a nervous disorder. He committed suicide 2 months later, a sad end to what was an otherwise fine brain and promising military career. All the same, South hadn't quite been able to get what the Major said out of his mind. The fact that someone had some bizarre ideas didn't mean that everything he said was total claptrap. After all, Sir Isaac Newton had dabbled in alchemy. That hardly invalidated the laws of motion. However, the Working Advisory Committee, which by now had been set up under the auspices of Rock Bank and the Pentagon, was unanimously opposed to the idea. Rockman in particular was appalled, and as he, together with the President, was co-chairman of the committee, the idea was stillborn. South did take the President aside on one occasion and tried to convince him of the soundness of the idea, but Hunter, modest man that he was, admitted freely that he had never understood the slightest thing about economics, and though he conceded that it sounded good, was convinced that it must contain a well-recognised fallacy which they had both of them failed to see on account of their lack of formal training. South nodded in acquiescence, but, remaining firmly unconvinced, withdrew several books on economics from the Pentagon Library. Later he went along to the Library of Congress and read on economic theory in more depth, but he received not the slightest satisfaction. When it came to the so-called credit multiplier, every single book on economics concurred that banks had always created credit, and that as this was the way it had always been done, this was the way it must be done always and forevermore. Southdale wasn't so sure. He could see that the economists had a point as far as conventional money and wealth was concerned. But here they had been given a free source of energy, or near enough a free source, and it seemed not only economically wrong, but morally wrong to sell it. South continued to ponder this anomaly, but soon he had to ponder it elsewhere. He was eased off the committee at the suggestion of Rockman. The banker suggested covertly to Hunter that although South was undoubtedly a fine soldier and aide-de-camp, he was so totally ignorant of the issues here that he should be replaced by an expert. Hunter, being ignorant of the issues himself, accepted the suggestion and arranged for South to be given a lateral promotion. He suggested too that perhaps he himself should resign from the committee in order to make way for another expert, but the banker would hear none of it. It seemed an age before the first terrestrial rail relator came off the assembly line, but eventually, with much fanfare, the domestic version of this wondrous new machine was made available to Washington residents. It retailed for $500, a very much lower price than the banker had wanted, and one that had been suggested and haggled for by the President himself. At one point, Rockman wished he had accepted James Hunter's suggestion that he resign from the committee, but on second thoughts his remaining was not such a bad idea. The President, being the nominal head, gave the committee a veneer of legitimacy. Most of the time Hunter would be far too busy with affairs of state to involve himself with its day-to-day running and policy-making decisions. The following spring, European factories began manufacturing rail-emulators under contract from the United States, and for about 3 years everything went smooth as clockwork. But after that the economies of the world became slowly distorted. For one thing, unemployment rose, steadily but surely, in both the energy industry proper and its ancillaries. All the countries of the world imported less and less oil, and the demand for coal virtually ceased completely. In the winter of the third year there was a massive slump on the world stock exchanges as energy stocks and futures fell by 70% virtually overnight. It was the biggest one-day drop since Black Monday in the 1980s, and this time it looked like being permanent. Rockman wasn't hurt in the slightest, as he had helped precipitate the fall by selling all his energy holdings in one tranche. He also made it clear that he had no intention of buying back anything, no matter how low the price fell.